right, welcome back to the show. METFLEX and Chill is the name of the show. And this is your host, Rachel Gregory. And today I have another podcast episode for you. Obviously, this is a podcast and this is another episode, but today it is a solo episode and I'm going to be answering your questions. So I posted a question box on my Instagram story, and that's where I'll be asking if anybody has any questions. So if you're on Instagram, you can follow me at rachelgregory.cns, and I'll be posting those question boxes every single Monday. And depending on how many questions I get, I'll try to get to them each week. If not, it will be in the following week episode. And then also, depending on how in-depth I want to get on the question, will result in how many questions I can answer within an episode, because I don't want these episodes going over an hour long. I want to respect your time. So anyway, today we have 3 questions that I'm going to answer. The first 2 questions are a little bit more, I wanted to dive a little bit more in depth to give you not just to answer the question, right, but to give you some practical info and some background info that you can use to take away from this. And that's really what my goal of the podcast is to share as much info with you as I can, to do my own research and share that with you, to share my experiences with you, both from myself and with the clients I work with. So that's the goal when it comes to these Q&A sessions, and I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you continue to ask questions because I love answering them. So as always, if you enjoy this episode as you're listening to it, the best way to help share it out and get as many people interested as possible and to help as many people is to take a screenshot of the episode as you're listening to it, post it in your Instagram stories and tag me, and then that way I can reshare it and we can just spread the word. All right, so let's get into the first question of the day. So the first question is, when increasing protein, how do we know/test that we have enough stomach acid to digest it properly? So this is a really great question. The first thing I'm going to mention is protein is so important. I don't care what type of diet or nutrition protocol you're following. If you're not consuming adequate, high quality protein, you're missing out. I'm not going to get into all the benefits of protein today because there are so many, and I could do a whole 10 podcasts on that itself. But I will link a blog post that I wrote. It's called Protein is Queen. I'll link that blog post in the show notes so you can check it out. And it's basically breaking down all of the important aspects of protein, why you need high quality sources, and why it's important. So to view the show notes, if you're listening to this on iTunes, you just swipe up and you can see all of the show notes. You can see links to things that I talk about in this episode, and you can go to my website and a bunch of other resources. So definitely check that out. I'll link the Protein is Queen blog post in the show notes. Okay, so how do we know if we have enough stomach acid to properly digest protein? So what is stomach acid? So stomach acid is also known as hydrochloric acid, or you'll see it as known as HCl. And there is sort of kind of this misconception out there. A lot of people think that they actually have too much stomach acid, but it's actually estimated, and I did some research on this, it's estimated that about 90% of Americans actually produce too little stomach acid. So it's really the opposite of what most people think. And there's a few different reasons for this. The main reason is just kind of the environment that we are in this modern day. So stomach acid production can be inhibited by a bunch of different factors, including stress, eating too much processed crap. So of course, in our modern world in America, we are, there's processed stuff everywhere, especially processed carbs and sugar. So that can inhibit the production of stomach acid. If you have some nutrient deficiencies, that can affect it. If you have allergies, or even excessive alcohol consumption is another reason why stomach acid production can be inhibited. So those are just a few reasons. There's obviously more, but I would say that stress and eating too much processed crap is probably the 2 main ones that we are faced with, most of us, really. And I would say stress is probably number 1. So there are many signs and symptoms associated with low stomach acid levels, and a few different lab tests and even different at-home tests that you can do to test these stomach acid levels. So I'm going to chat about 2 of the at-home tests that I know of and how you can do them in a second. But first, I just want to talk about a few of the common signs and symptoms of low stomach acid if you're curious if you might have this or if you want to test for it. So some of the most common signs of low stomach acid production are bloating, digestive upset after eating, gas or heartburn after eating, especially when we're eating higher protein, or feeling tired, like feeling really tired after eating a high protein meal. Those are the most common signs that you might have low stomach acid production. As I mentioned, there's 2 at-home tests that I'm going to discuss, but there also are a few different lab tests that you can get done that I've heard of. These lab tests are probably for those who may be, experiencing a little bit more severe issues, and especially if you've maybe failed the 2 at-home tests that I'm going to talk about, or if you're just experiencing some other issues. These lab tests are a little bit more expensive, or they're probably fairly expensive, just based off the research I've done. But the 2 most common lab tests are the Heidelberg stomach acid test and the gastric acid secretion test. So those are the 2 lab tests that are most common. There's probably other ones as well, but those are the ones that I have heard of. But there are, as I mentioned, at-home tests you can do. And the 2 at-home tests that I know of and I'm going to discuss are the baking soda test and the HCL Challenge Test. So I'll go through these real quick in case you want to try them out at home. The baking soda test this test is super easy, and obviously all you need is baking soda. It's in the name. So this test works by creating a chemical reaction in your stomach from the baking soda and your stomach acid. So again, your stomach acid is also known as HCl. And the result of this reaction is the production of carbon dioxide gas. So when baking soda reacts with the HCl in your stomach, which is stomach acid, this causes the production of carbon dioxide gas, which causes you to burp. So this test, I'm going to go through how you can do it. But so for this test, there's really no published data, and results can vary from person to person, but it can still be used as, a cheap, non-invasive baseline measure. And it's simple enough that you can, retest it every month or so to see if you notice any changes, which we're going to talk about in a second, how you can implement certain ways to increase your stomach acid if you are noticing that you have lower stomach acid. So again, there's no published data on this. It's kind of just an at-home test that you can do. But if you do it multiple times in a row, like a few days in a row, and kind of get a good kind of take on what you experienced from it, I would say you have to do it at least more than once, probably 3 to 5 times to get a really good idea and to help prevent any false negatives that might happen with the test, which I'm going to discuss in a second. But it can give you a good baseline and something to work with, right? So how do you do the baking soda test? So you want to do this test first thing in the morning before eating or drinking anything. And it's super simple. All you do is mix a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda in about 4 ounces of cold water, drink it, and then just time how long it takes you to burp. So you'll want to time up to 5 minutes. And in theory, if your stomach is producing adequate amounts of stomach acid, you're likely going to burp within 2 to 3 minutes. Any burping after 3 minutes may indicate that you have a low acid level. So that's the test itself. If you have early and repeated burping, then it may be due to too much stomach acid, but also you don't want to confuse the early burping with maybe small burps that happen just from, the initial swallowing of the solution. That's why you probably want to do this a few times over a course of a few days. So basically a burp within 3 minutes of drinking the baking soda solution may mean you have an adequate level of stomach acid. A burp after 3 minutes or not at all may indicate a low level of stomach acid. And again, it's best to do this test 3 to 5 times on consecutive days in order to make sure you aren't getting a false positive, as I mentioned, due to different variables that can be involved in this. So this test is cheap. It's non-invasive. It can give you some info to work with and at least give you a baseline that you can maybe test over the course of a few months just to kind of test out what your stomach acid levels are like, or if you have enough stomach acid, if you are struggling with things like that. So the next test is the HCL Challenge Test. This is another at-home, fairly cheap test. Typically, you do this test if you have major symptoms of low stomach acid, some of the things that I mentioned before, and you failed the baking soda test. So this is probably the next test that I would recommend if you fail the baking soda test, or again, if you're experiencing severe bloating, just feel super tired after eating a high protein meal, gas, things like that. So how do you do the HCL Challenge Test? Basically, you need an HCL supplement. So you're going to buy the supplement Betaine HCl with Pepsin. You can get a bottle for probably like 15 to 20 bucks on Amazon or, at your local CVS or Rite Aid. And the Pepsin part of it, Pepsin is just a type of digestive enzyme that particularly helps with breaking down proteins. So you can generally find a Betaine HCl Pepsin supplement in dose ranges of about 300 to 500 milligrams per capsule of HCl in combination with about 100 to 200 milligrams of Pepsin. So that's what you're going to want to look for. Again, you can get it on Amazon or your local drugstore. So once you have the Betaine HCl supplement, what you'll do is you'll eat a high protein meal, and you want it to at least be 6 ounces of protein, 6 ounces of meat, preferably. And in the middle of the meal, you'll take one of these Betaine HCl pills, finish the meal, and then observe what you notice. So you always want to take the Betaine HCl either halfway through the meal or right at the end of the meal. Some people who supplement with HCl take it before the meal, but you don't want to do that because it could give you a faulty experience of heartburn, which we're going to talk about in a second. And you could actually, quote unquote, turn off your natural stomach acid production. So you don't want to take it before the meal. You want to take it during the meal, so in the middle or right when you finish. So what you're going to look for, so this is the observation part of it. So after you've eaten your meal, you've taken the Betaine HCl. If you get any mild burning in your throat after the meal, that indicates that you probably don't need to take an HCl supplement, right? It indicates that you probably have enough stomach acid production. If you experience no burning, you want to increase the dose by another 500 milligrams, which is just another pill, for the next meal, and check again for burning. If you again experience no burning after the additional 500 milligrams at your next meal, continue to repeat this until you feel a slight burning sensation in your throat. Once you experience that slight burning, you'll back off the dose by about 500 milligrams from that point, and then use that as your personal HCl dose if you do decide to supplement with HCl, which is, again, hydrochloric acid, which is stomach acid, right? So it's just the supplementation form of that to help bring that up. Again, it's best to do this test 2 to 3 times in order to make sure you aren't getting a false positive just with the baking soda test. There's other variables involved, of course, so you want to make sure that you are doing this, 2 to 3 times consecutively so that you can probably take the average of those experiences and make your conclusions from there. And of course, you always want to check with your doctor before taking any supplements at all. Again, I'm not giving you any type of medical advice. This is just providing you with examples and resources to kind of go out and make your own decisions with it. And always talk to your doctor before, especially if you are on any other medications, you'll always want to talk to your doctor if you're incorporating any type of supplement. So if you fail this test and don't necessarily want to start taking HCl, there are a few other ways to naturally increase stomach acid production, which I want to go through really quickly. So the first way to naturally increase stomach acid is don't eat in a stressful state. So if you're eating in what we call a sympathetic state, which is known as the fight or flight state, versus the parasympathetic state, which is known as our rest and digest state, which is what we should be eating in. If we're in a sympathetic state or we're really stressed out when we're eating, that's going to inhibit our digestion and inhibit our stomach acid production. If you think about it, if we're stressed out, it's going to be really hard for our focus in our body to go to digestion. We're thinking about all these other things. Our body is just automatically, subconsciously doing all these other things to help relieve that stress. And so, focusing on digestion is probably not what it wants to be focused on, right? So and this is why for me, particularly, like if I sit down to eat, the biggest thing that you want to do is be mindful first and take a few deep breaths. Just, focus on eating your food. Don't be scrolling through Instagram. Don't be watching TV. These can make a huge difference if you just, slow down. That's the next kind of way to increase stomach acid, is to slow down and actually chew your food. This is a simple concept, but it's definitely very overlooked. So if you don't know this, digestion actually begins in your mouth. So you need to chew your food and take, smaller bites and more frequent bites to help stimulate digestive enzymes properly. So slow down, chew your food, become more mindful. That's actually going to help with digestive enzyme production and also more stomach acid production. Another tip is to limit drinking during your meals. So drinking, any type of liquid, water, whatever it may be, can actually dilute digestive enzymes. So that can be something that you might want to be aware of. Also, just increasing your food quality. So focusing on whole foods, processed foods and sugars can cause inflammation, as we know. And this can actually decrease acid activity and also trigger acid reflux symptoms. So you don't want to be eating tons of processed food. That's probably the first thing that you should cut out if you're experiencing any of these issues. Also, incorporating fermented veggies can also help. So things like kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, these can naturally improve your stomach acid levels or stomach acid production. A few other things are ginger or ginger tea. That's been shown to help with acid reflux. And then lastly, apple cider vinegar. So I'm sure you've heard about apple cider vinegar. I call it ACV. Raw apple cider vinegar can actually increase stomach acid levels because its acidic properties actually introduce more acid into the digestive tract. So that kind of makes sense. So what you can do with apple cider vinegar is just try, if you're experiencing any of the things we talked about, bloating, digestive issues, all the symptoms of low stomach acid, before introducing a supplement, what you could do is try taking 1 to 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar and about 2 to 4 ounces of water. And you'll do that. You'll kind of just chug it down. It's not going to taste very good, but just chug it down about 15 minutes before your meal. That can help with stomach acid production in some people. Also, taking straight shots of apple cider vinegar is probably not a good idea because if you don't dilute it with water or another drink, it can actually potentially damage the enamel of your teeth. So you don't want to do that. You want to dilute it with some type of drink or water and just chug it down. And if you don't notice a significant improvement with taking this, and you've also failed both of the tests above, then I would potentially look into adding a Betaine HCl supplement per the recommendations that I mentioned earlier. Again, you're going to want to consult your doctor first before introducing any type of supplement, especially if you are on other types of medication. And if you are taking any medications like ibuprofen, Tylenol, or aspirin, you probably don't want to take HCl. Again, chat with your doctor about this. And if you do have a history of gastritis or stomach intestinal ulcers, you probably don't want to take Betaine HCl either because that can actually cause a flare-up with this. So it's not generally recommended. Instead, if you have a history of that, you can try supplementing with other digestive enzymes or other, gut supportive nutrients. Some common ones are L-glutamine and aloe vera. Those are a few popular ones. But again, if you have any history of this, check it with your doctor first. But I definitely recommend focusing first on the natural ways to increase stomach acid if you feel like you're struggling with this or you have any of those symptoms above. This mainly comes back to just being more mindful when you sit down to eat. So again, chewing your food. Don't drink too much during the meal. Don't eat in a stressed state. Don't focus on other things while you're eating. Focus on the food. And focusing on things like this can really go a long way and also help you feel fuller after your meals too, which is something that I've had to work on personally. I tend to get into periods of time where I eat lunch while I'm trying to work because I want to, work out during lunch. So I've been trying to get away from that instead of, working and eating at the same time. I've been sitting down for my meal, taking at least 15 to 20 minutes to just enjoy my food, not focusing on anything else, not scrolling through Instagram. And it's made a huge difference, not just in my digestion, but in my feeling of fullness after that meal. Because if you're just, going through the motions of eating your food and you don't even pay attention to how it's making you feel and you're not taking it in, it can be so easy to, I'm sure you experienced before, like you look down and your plate's empty and you're like, oh crap, I didn't even realize I just ate all of that. That comes back to being mindful when you're sitting down to eat. So those are just a few tips. Those 2 at-home tests are 2 of the tests that I know of and that I've researched. I'm sure there's other ones out there. But hopefully that helped answer the question. All right, the next question is there any particular carb food or food type that you feel really fuels a workout best? Okay, this is another great question. So when talking about exercise nutrition or just nutrition around your workout, pre, intra, post, we always need to consider a few things before we actually chat about the quote unquote ideal foods and also the timing of those foods. So first thing is we always need to understand what your specific goal is going into the workout. So is it fat loss? Is it building muscle? Is it to increase performance? Because this is going to determine how you actually structure your food intake throughout the day, right? So if your primary goal is fat loss, pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition are not as important as your overall daily nutrition, in the sense that you need to have your daily nutrition dialed in first and make sure that you can adhere well to that for your overall day before worrying about pre, intra, post-workout nutrition. I'm not saying that the pre, intra, post-workout nutrition doesn't matter when it comes to fat loss goals. Of course it matters, but your overall adherence and your overall intake throughout the day and what you can adhere to, again, adherence, I said it like 10 times, that is the most important things when it comes to fat loss goals. And of course, the workout matters and how you feel your workout matters. But again, if your primary goal is fat loss, you have to get that dialed in first. If your primary goal is to build muscle or increase performance, then workout nutrition becomes very important. So you want to fuel appropriately. You want to feel your best during and after your workout so that you can perform optimally, recover optimally. And this is where pre, intra, post-workout nutrition does play a really big role. Before we talk about any of this, we have to go back to what the primary goal is. And again, I'm not saying that you can't lose fat and build muscle at the same time. I'm not going to get into that, but I do want you to realize that it comes back to kind of that daily overall, what your overall day looks like before getting into the nitty-gritty. The next thing is everyone is different, right? What works for you, what works for me, what works for somebody else, and makes you feel good or makes me feel good during my workout is going to be different than other people, right? This is just how it works. Everybody is different. We're all our own individuals. So something that works for me may not work for you. And then also, this is going to change and evolve over time. So something that might have worked for you a month ago might not be working right now. Or, I mean, I would say a little bit longer than that, but something that worked for you last year might not work for you right now, especially depending on where you're coming from and where you've, evolved to. So you always want to keep that in the back of your mind. Things are always going to change, and something that works for one person may not work for the other, especially when it comes to pre, intra, and post-workout nutrition, just because we're all different, right? And then also the next thing is, what is your actual current nutrition protocol, right? So are you following a low carb diet? Are you following a keto diet, a cyclical keto diet, a targeted keto diet? Are you following a high carb diet? Are you following a vegan diet? Like it depends. It matters because obviously this is going to, determine what you can, or I don't want to say can or can't consume, but what you are consuming throughout the day and what those foods are looking like. That's going to also determine, what you would consume before your workout. So lastly, I guess it would be the type, the length, and the time of your workout. So the type of workout you're doing, the length of the workout, and the time of day you work out will actually change how you structure your nutrition timing around that, right? So what type of workout are you doing? Is it a strength hypertrophy training style? Is it low intensity cardio, high intensity conditioning? Is it CrossFit, Orange Theory? There's so many different types of workouts, right? So nutrition to fuel those workouts would potentially be different for different people. Are you running a marathon? Are you, doing a triathlon or whatever it may be, right? They're all different. And then also, what time of day are you working out? So are you working out in the morning, midday, afternoon, night? That's also going to determine how you fuel your workout as well. More so if you're in that, fat loss category, because again, we want to think about what our nutrition is like throughout the rest of the day. And it all goes back to adherence with that. So, then also if you are, if your goal is to build muscle and performance, if you're working out in the morning, you may, especially if it's early in the morning, you may not be consuming, a ton of food before then, right? Versus if you worked out in the afternoon, you would have probably already consumed a good amount of food for the day. So that is kind of different. So I know I'm kind of going down the rabbit hole with this, but I just want to make sure that you understand that these things matter when we talk about this, because these are all things that I want you to, think about. And then also we have to, understand the goal of our pre-workout nutrition. So why do we even care about pre-workout nutrition? Obviously, the obvious is because we want to perform well during the workout, but you also want to think about, the specific goals. So I would say there's two main goals that you want to get out of your pre-workout meal, snack, or supplement, or whatever it may be. The first one is you want to optimize focus and energy for that workout. You also want to focus on foods that absorb quickly and support quick stomach emptying. This is more important, obviously, the closer you get to the workout. Think about timing. So if you're having a meal, ideally, you'll probably want to have that full meal about 1 to 3 hours before the workout. That's probably ideal. If it's just a snack or a supplement, 30 minutes before or up to and throughout the workout, which would be intra-workout nutrition. That's when we get into that. And then again, it also depends on if it's a morning or a night workout. And then of course, your individuality. So your individual digestion and preference. So there's some people who don't mind feeling like their stomach's fuller during a workout. And there's other people who hate that feeling and they like to work out on an empty stomach. So that will depend as well. Okay, so let's get into the answer of the question now. So again, I told you I want to provide you with context and some background information instead of just giving you the answer to the question or giving you at least my opinion to the answer, right? Because especially with questions like this, like everybody has different opinions, experience, everybody does different research, things like that. So this is obviously my own research, my opinion, my experience with myself and my clients. But when we are talking pre-workout nutrition, I'm going to give you some general recommendations that you can use to adapt for yourself depending on your specific goals and then everything we just talked about. So firstly, when it comes to pre-workout nutrition, I would always recommend that you have a good amount of obviously water and electrolytes. So you want to make sure you're hydrated. Doesn't matter what type of workout you're doing or even what type of diet you're following. Water and electrolytes are super important. The second thing would be caffeine. So caffeine is probably the most used ergogenic aid and something that can help. We know research study after research study just helps to boost performance. So I would recommend, coffee or tea, or you could do a high quality pre-workout supplement. I would just be careful with the pre-workout supplements because there's a lot of crappy ones out there on the market. A lot of them are just pumped full of just caffeine and made with just sucky ingredients. So if you are going to, take a pre-workout, just make sure you do your research first. Personally, I like just sticking with coffee and MCT powder, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So when we talk about, the different macronutrients when it comes to pre-workout nutrition, I'm just going to go through each one. So I'll go through, fats, proteins, and carbs. When it comes to fats, if you're going to consume fats pre-workout or in your pre-workout meal, I would stick with the more faster digesting, faster absorbing fats. So things like MCT oil or MCT oil powder, like I mentioned, I put that in my coffee. Or things like coconut oil, butter, ghee, maybe some nut butter that you put on, if you're having a pre-workout meal or a snack or anything like that. Those would be the fats that I would stick with, faster digesting, faster absorbing. When it comes to proteins, if it's closer to the workout, you'll want a greater ratio of fast digesting proteins. So for example, a high quality whey protein source, again, high quality. There's a lot of whey proteins out there, just like the pre-workouts that are made with crap. So you want to make sure that you are getting a high quality source. Undenatured is best. You could do EAAs, so essential amino acids. You can do a collagen powder, like a high quality collagen powder, or a protein bar. Those would be more of the faster digesting proteins. I'm not going to get into the difference between collagen and whey right now, but there are some differences. Maybe I'll talk about that in a future episode. But that's if you're close to your workout. Again, you want a greater ratio of faster digesting protein further away from your workout. So if you're doing more of like a pre-workout meal that's maybe 2-3 hours before, you'll want a greater ratio of slow digesting protein. So that just makes sense. Obviously, the closer to the workout, the faster you'll want that energy, the faster you'll want it to be digested. If you're further out from the workout, You can do slower digestion proteins such as like non-fat plain yogurt. I like non-fat plain Greek yogurt or low-fat cottage cheese. You can do things like eggs, lean meats, things like that. But it is good to have kind of a mix of both, especially if you are kind of in that middle ground. So maybe you're like an hour to 2 hours before the workout, or even half an hour. It really depends, again, on you and what you can tolerate going into the workout. If you like having a little bit of food in your stomach, if you don't, then you'll have to eat further out or not at all. It really depends. But it's good to have a mix of both fast and slow digesting proteins. So for example, you could do like a non-fat Greek yogurt, which is yogurt is a slower digesting protein because it has mostly casein protein. And you can mix it with like a scoop of high quality whey. So that'll be a combination of both fast and digesting. So that's a good combo. That's something that I do pretty often if I'm having just like a snack type thing, or I'll have a meal and I'll usually have like a high quality meat source in that meal for my protein. Okay, so if we're getting into carbs, right? So this is probably the one that a lot of people are interested in. So if you're consuming carbs, again, carbs are not essential. But I would say if the goal is to optimize your performance and, again, become as metabolically flexible as possible, utilizing carbs strategically is definitely beneficial. So especially when it comes to performance-based goals, carbs can be very helpful. But again, it comes back to that concept of metabolic flexibility. And if you are new to this podcast, or if you haven't checked it out yet, I have a free metabolic flexibility course. It's called the METFLEX Life Course, and the link is actually in the show notes. So you can swipe up after you finish listening to this episode, and the link, it should say METFLEX Life Course, and you can click it and just sign up. And I take you through what metabolic flexibility is and how to best optimize yourself and your nutrition to become as metabolically flexible as possible. So again, it's 100% free. The link is in the show notes. Getting back to what I was talking about. So again, your carb intake depends on you personally. It depends on the type of workout you're doing and some other factors as well. So I'm just going to give you a few recommendations. Ideally, if we're talking about carbs for our pre-workout meal, you'll want to do a combo of both starch and fruit in an 80-20 ratio. So the main reason for incorporating like an 80-20 ratio of starch to fruit is because you can utilize multiple glucose transporters and actually get a better absorption rate of these carbs. You can actually get more nutrients and still have, a combination of fast and slow releasing carbs. So that's starch and fruit. So again, starch and fruit are basically carried throughout our body in different transporters. As I mentioned, fruit is fructose and starchier carbs turn to glucose. And they utilize different transporters, right? So more will be absorbed I guess you can think of it as, here's a good analogy. So just think about, you have two buses and they're going to the same place, right? If you have two buses going to the same place, they're filled with more people. So there's more room for more people, obviously, on those buses, and they both get to the same place and there's more people. So yeah, it's a party, right? It's more people. But if you only have one bus going to the same place, then it's either a crowded bus and there's not as many people going there. So you can think about that as kind of the analogy that I just butchered for absorbing fruit and starches together. Hopefully that made sense. I really need to work on my analogies because I don't know, I'm not the best at them, but I'll work on that. Let's get into the types of starches that I recommend. So personally, I would recommend sticking with more whole food starches. So potatoes, white rice, taro, plantains, squash, maybe some oats, or even like rice cakes, gluten-free rice cakes. Those are good options. For fruits, you can go with berries. I love berries. You can even do bananas. Honey is another one that a lot of people use. Honey is actually a combination of glucose and fructose. But those are some options. So as you get closer to the workout, or if we start to talk about intra-workout nutrition, some of the supplements that I would recommend, again, it all depends on the type of workout you're doing, what your nutrition is like, all of those things I just talked about. But in terms of like slow digesting carb sources, when it comes to supplements, you've probably heard me talk about UCAN SuperStarch. It's something that I use. it doesn't raise blood sugar, and it is a slow release. So it's kind of, I always describe it as like a carb that actually acts as a fat, because it is a slow release of glucose into your bloodstream. So it doesn't give you that, immediate spike, but it gives you kind of that slow release of energy. The reason that I like it is because if I consume it about 30 minutes before my workout and then I sip on it throughout the beginning of my workout, I try to finish it at least when I get to mid-workout. Then the end of my workouts, I notice so much more energy. I notice that I have more energy to kind of finish the workout. I have a better like pump at the end. I can, bang out a few more reps, things like that is what I've noticed for myself personally. So another common slow digesting carb source is cluster dextrin, which is also known as HBCD or highly branched cyclic dextrin. That's another slower digesting carb source you might have heard of. I personally stick with SuperStarch because I like that. And then if we're talking about faster acting carb sources, things like dextrose or maltodextrin in the form of powders, or some people even do like sweet tarts or like gummy bears, things like that. That will give you a more immediate hit of energy. Obviously, it's a fast digesting. It's just straight, glucose. Personally, I don't use those, but I know some people who do. So again, it just comes back to you as an individual, what you feel best at. And then lastly, I just want to mention another cool pre-workout kind of hack. So you might have heard of something called the Carb Swish or the Carb Rinse. So this basically just involves taking like a sip of a beverage or drink that contains carbs or glucose. So you can think of like Gatorade or Powerade or other sports drink. So you would basically just take a sip, swish it around in your mouth for about 5 to 10 seconds, and then spit it out. So this is the Carb Swish or rinse, like I mentioned. And there's actually been a few studies that have found improved performance during moderate to high intensity exercise using this method. So it's thought to actually activate receptors in the mouth that are connected to the reward areas in your brain. And it can lead to a reduction in our perceived exertion and actually help to increase effort and motivation during that workout. So there's actually been studies done on this. So if you haven't tried it before, I've tried it before, it could either be just the placebo effect or actually that it triggers those receptors in our mouth that triggers the reward centers in our brain. Again, I don't know. There's not tons of research on it, but there is some. So I don't know, try it out for yourself. Just swish a little bit of Gatorade around for 5 to 10 seconds, spit it out, and see if you can bang out another rep. Hopefully those tips help with, structuring your pre-workout nutrition. Again, everybody is so different, and there are some, kind of not hard rules, but there are some, ways that you can more research-backed ways to incorporate different things pre-workout. But again, it also comes back to where you're coming from. So if you are a super fat adapted athlete, if you are super metabolically flexible, or if you're not metabolically flexible at all, that might determine how you react to these different things, especially with increasing carbs or not. So you have to find what works for you, and it's always going to be, experimenting and trying things out for yourself and really just finding what makes you feel your best and perform your best, right? And it's different for everyone. All right, last question of this episode, or for this episode, cocktails and keto. Can you please give your perspective on this hard seltzer popularity? Sure. So this will be a little bit of a shorter answer than the last two. But if you don't know what hard seltzer is, it's basically just a combination of seltzer, alcohol, and non-caloric or non-sugar like fruit flavorings. So the most popular that I know of are White Claw and Truly. Those are the two brands that I know of, and I've had before. But I've also seen Bud Light and Smirnoff recently come out with their own lines of hard seltzer. So all of these hard seltzer, you'll probably see more and more pop up over the next year. They've actually gained a lot of popularity due to the healthier, low carb option that it is. So when you are, looking at alcohol, it's usually hard to find nutrition info on alcoholic drinks, especially like beer and things like that. But with the spike seltzer companies, they actually use the nutrition labels to their advantage, to help promote this quote unquote healthier, low carb option. So just to give you an example, like Truly, the brand that I mentioned, a 12-ounce can actually contains 100 calories, only 1 gram of sugar, and 2 grams of carbs. And I believe it's pretty similar with White Claw and all of the other ones as well. So do I think it's a healthier choice than maybe say like wine, beer, or other sugary cocktails? Probably. Yeah. I mean, it all comes down to one, how much of it you're consuming, and then what else is in it. Again, mostly how much you're consuming, because you may think, oh, this is a healthy type of alcohol, so I can just drink as much as I want. Not really the case. But it is definitely lower in sugar and carbs than, say a margarita or even beer or wine. So I do think personally they're a good option if you do want to enjoy a drink. But again, just because it has fewer calories or fewer quote unquote carbs, it doesn't mean that it's actually healthy for you. I don't think any alcoholic drink you can use the word healthy, because alcohol itself is a toxin, right? So alcohol does have calories. It actually has 7 calories per gram. And it's processed a lot differently in our body than carbs, fats, and proteins. So like I mentioned, it's a toxin. So when we consume alcohol, it doesn't matter what type of alcohol it is. It's the first priority for our body to actually get rid of it. And so it will basically turn all of the energy to processing and getting rid of that alcohol as much as possible, and turn all other digestion away from like digesting if you're eating along with your alcohol. So, carbs, fats, and proteins, your body's main goal is to just get rid of that toxin as fast as possible first. So it kind of puts all the other things on the back burner. And so if you do have specific goals, especially fat loss, building muscle, things like that, you can fit alcohol into your life, I personally believe, but you have to know how, and you have to plan it and understand the consequences, right? So if your main goal is fat loss and you want to get as lean as possible in a specific period of time, incorporating alcohol can be done, but it's probably going to slow that down, right? It's going to slow that down, especially even when it comes to building muscle and things like that, because it's going to slow down that recovery process as well. So you just have to be mindful of what your personal goals are. I don't think that consuming alcohol is necessarily a bad thing. It depends obviously on you and your history. But just always remember what the goal is, and just always remember that alcohol is a toxin to our body. So our body is going to want to get rid of it as much as possible and kind of put the pause button on everything else during that time. And we can go into a bunch of things on alcohol. I won't dive into that too much. But if you do have other questions, definitely let me know, and I can dive into those further in future episodes. But again, it all comes back always to your personal goals and your history. All right. So to wrap up, I hope I answered your questions. I hope all of that information helped. Again, if you enjoyed the episode, please make sure to share it out. The best way to spread the word, again, is by taking a screenshot of the episode, posting it in your Instagram story, and tagging me so that I can repost it. And then again, remember, everything we discussed is in the episode show notes. So if I mentioned anything, or I mentioned anything that you should check out, I've linked it in the show notes. You can just swipe up if you are listening on iTunes and click those links and view all of the other information. So I hope that helped, and I'm looking forward to answering more questions. So I'll see you next time.